Robert Zemeckis has brought us great moments of joy and wonder with movies like Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Simultaneously, he's brought us great moments of horror with movies like The Polar Express. Dear God,
Oh
those dead
shit.
faces and eyes.
That's probably the most terrifying horror movie I've ever seen in my life, and it wasn't even a horror movie.
He's also been responsible for some, moments of audience confusion, like Beowulf, which we actually enjoyed quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
But it was kind of still like, man, that Polar Express is still kind of there a little bit. But the point is, the man is not afraid to push boundaries and test the waters a bit. And more often than not, it goes in his favor. However, today we're talking about a movie that kind of didn't go one way or the other, just kind of was forgotten and stayed in limbo. That's right, we're talking about 1992's Death Becomes Her. Hit that music!
Movies, music, story times, all kinds of shit for you. Everything goes if it's happening now from Copyland.
You were but a nut in our father's ball sack when I first heard of this movie.
You went with that one, huh?
Oh yeah, could open with 100 other ones, but that's the one I went with. No, but yeah, you weren't even born yet when this movie came out, and I really, really wanted to go see it in the theater, but our older brother is notorious for being cheap as fuck, and I was but a wee one at the time, and I didn't have money of my own, still don't. But the point is, I was like, damn, I missed that. But lo and behold, a few years later, when your semen to human
sprouted from the dead.
evolution was complete, yeah, man, I finally got to see it, and that because they used to play it a lot on the local television channel, like a lot. It was one of those weekend movies that you couldn't avoid every fucking weekend.
Like FX and True Lies.
Yeah, and usually that was because the movies were bad and or had failed at the box office. But this one, like I said, this one remains in some sort of limbo. It did pretty damn well at the box office considering its budget. But critically, it was kind of like in that go-between place. So I'm assuming somewhere along the way they decided, let's just stick this here in the replay city. So I got to see this movie tons of times when I was a kid. And I had a real affinity for it. But I hadn't revisited it in damn near over 20 decades. 20 decades? That's right. I was a compatriot of Scott Joplin. Yeah, over 20 years, and it popped up in Hulu, and I said, "This is a ripe time to check this out." And
oldest Scott Joplin ever, by the way.
Yeah, or roll the dice and see if it's still as good as I remember it, and hopefully you would agree as well. And what'd you think, though? I mean, again, I hadn't seen this in a couple of decades, so what'd you end up thinking? What's your first impressions off the cuff?
I liked it quite a bit. It's kind of one of those like Addams Family feeling films.
Mm-hmm. A certain morbid quirk.
Yeah,
to
which was around up my alley, or up the butt. I don't know. I'm going with this anyway. It was good, is what I'm saying here. I was trying to do a little play on words.
Yep,
failed.
Didn't work.
Nope.
Yeah, man. This not only held up, but I actually liked it exponentially more than I was a kid. Mainly because a lot of the stuff, like kind of like the nudge, nudge, wink, wink nature of it, means a lot more to me now than it did as a kid. I mean, what did I care about vanity as a kid? I didn't. This was the fucking long story short of that. But now, all that stuff hits a lot more, closer to home. And on top of that, I appreciate the humor a lot more. And yeah, you're right. What always attracted to me to this movie was that kind of morbid, quirky approach, not only visually but in terms of its humor. It always reminded me of something that I would be interested in Tim Burton directing, and or something that Frank Oz could have literally directed himself. So I was very glad to see that it held up and that it even had more value to me. But let's talk about a little bit of the backstory to this. First of all, a lot of people don't realize how important this movie is, even though it did kind of get, scuttled away under the fucking carpet. It actually was a revolutionary movie in the sense that, first of all, this is the first time a CGI skin tone was used in the movie. And I gotta say, though you can tell, it still holds up pretty good.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
It's obviously a super mega effect.
Yeah.
But weirdly enough, some effects now look worse.
Yeah. And you got to give credit to where the credit is due, and that's, we had bigwigs working on this.
Yeah.
You know, Industrial Light and Magic worked on this. So obviously a lot of effort was put into trying to make it as realistic as possible at the time. And the result was really what they ended up doing, you know, in a subsequent movie, ILM, that would be Jurassic Park. There was a mixture of physical effects, green screen action, and early CGI. But it all ends up working out pretty damn great. It still looks good, you know what I'm saying? It still looks passable. And if any, you know, fakeness does come through, it only adds to the, you know, kind of weird nature of the whole affair. So I was very surprised at that particular aspect. But yeah, for that reason, this movie actually is kind of an important milestone in effects history at the very least, though, you know, overshadowed by what followed it. Of course, Jurassic Park was a humongous movie. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that until I did a little bit of research on this. And I was like, oh, wow, that was interesting to find out. But that's not what we're talking about, because that would require even more research. We're talking about our impressions about this fucking little pick. First of all, this is a movie that has Bruce Willis before he was the balls-out action star he eventually became.
It's actually kind of weird.
It is.
Because you're used to Bruce Willis being a certain way.
An asshole.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird. I'm not talking about his roles, but
just in general.
In general, doing his shitty-ass jazz albums and shit.
He had just released a single.
Oh, there you go.
So that never went away.
There you go. But yeah, it's kind of weird to see him in a comedic. I mean, he's done comedic roles, but even in the comedic roles, he's kind of like that tough guy, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, this was when he was fresh off Moonlighting, and, you know, he still had that. He still was more dependent on the comedic side. He had just done Die Hard 1 and 2, I believe. So the action hero career was nascent. And you could imagine that he was still kind of vacillating between the two, maybe. And, you know, again, like you said, yeah, we've seen him in comedic roles, but since he became Bruce Willis, the action guy.
He's always Bruce Willis.
It's the Bruce Willis action guy. Funny, this was just a kind of like almost nebbish, weak-willed, push-around type of character.
Several times we said he reminded us of Rick Moranis.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird when thinking of Bruce Willis reminding you of freaking Rick Moranis in Ghostbusters. But so, he was there. It was weird.
Yeah, man. I remember thinking that as a kid, and I'm glad you thought the same thing, because I was just like, man, his mannerisms, the way he's reacting to
walking,
things.
The way he's walk.
Yeah, eventually when he gets super manic,
just like into full freaking Vince mode.
It was pretty awesome to see that, man, and he really does pull it off incredibly well. And so, do credit to Bruce Willis on doing on his comedic chops. Let's say that. Yeah. But likewise, we have here the two other stars of this movie, in Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn. And you got to remember that at the time, Goldie Hawn was really barely coming out of her, the biggest part of her career, when she was kind of like this, sweet-faced, cutesy comedy star. And Meryl Streep has always kind of been a big deal, and even to this day she's still a big deal, so that's interesting, especially someone of Meryl Streep's caliber, to be doing a comedy. But what's interesting, and I don't know if you're familiar with this particular part of Meryl Streep's career, or any for that matter, because you're not exactly a Streep fanatic.
Yeah, I'm not a big Streepite. I mean,
Streepite.
I can appreciate her value, and she's always kind of just been there, in the freaking spotlight. But it's not someone that I'm well versed in.
Yeah. No, I've followed her. I haven't followed her ardently, but I've seen a lot of her pictures, and I do enjoy Meryl Streep. But interestingly enough, a few years before this movie came out, a very similarly, I wouldn't say themed, but plotted movie starring Meryl Streep came out, and it was called She Devil, and it starred her and Roseanne.
Oh. And
Roseanne would be kind of the equivalent of the Goldie Hawn character in this. And Meryl Streep was kind of the equivalent of her character in Death Becomes Her. And there was similar plotting devices in the picture, though, of course, it was a different kind of movie. So I'd never even thought about that until recently. I was flipping through the channels and She Devil came out. I was like, oh, I remember this piece of shit. In fact, the only thing I remembered about She Devil was how annoying the movie was to me. How weird and out of place it was, at the time when I saw it. And Roseanne had this huge fucking mole on her face because they were trying to accentuate how homely she was. And I was like, oh man, she's Roseanne. You don't have to accentuate how homely she is.
Just look at her.
But Anyway, that was kind of something that popped back into mind while we were watching this. But this is far superior to the She-Devil, in my opinion, of course, even though She-Devil surprisingly got a lot of good reviews. That's really odd. But anyway, if you haven't seen Death Becomes Her, check it out for sure. But a real brief recap of what it is Bruce Willis plays this kind of weak-willed, push-around doctor, Beverly Hills doctor, a plastic surgeon, who is caught between two women. One, an aging Broadway star, or a big screen star too, and the other, a kind of vengeance-driven, cast-out author.
Who's been
who's been rejected,
upstaged by the other chick.
Yeah, so basically, there's a rivalry between these two females over this one guy, and really it transcends him as it becomes more of a rivalry between their egos. But yeah, that's the basic setup, and introduced into this concept is some supernatural overtones in the sense of this society of people that allows a certain percentage, the top 1%, if you will, the elite of Hollywood, especially
EC3s, if you will,
to enter their realm of influence and consume a what is it, like a
little potion
of immortality. Basically,
like
it keeps them young and vibrant. The catch being that though you are young forever, technically, any harm you bestow upon your body will remain, or will at least exhibit itself in some form or fashion, which leads to a lot of, crazy, wacky hijinks, body humor, / horror, I guess. And and that's where the crazy kind of Tim Burton-esque elements come into play. But yeah, man, going back to the other two female stars, Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn, I thought they were absolutely wonderful in this. They really played up, kind of like the hammy stereotype that they were, supposed to portray.
Yeah.
Anyone you enjoyed particularly over the other?
Those two?
Yeah.
Meryl Streep was pretty great. It was weird to see, because I was like, you hear Meryl Streep, you're like, expect some fancy shit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure she hasn't been in fancy
Meryl
shit.
Meryl Streep, fancy shit, coming soon.
But it's one of those names where you're like, you just expect some fancy, freaking like award level shit. So it was kind of weird to see her like break her little neck and shit, flopping around on the floor. So that was kind of cool. And I do want to say, again, I've never wanted to bang Meryl Streep.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would hit it in this film.
Oh yeah, man. I think this is again, especially for Goldie Hawn, but I think this was one of the last movies where they were at their prime physically.
Yeah.
Definitely for Goldie Hawn, because I don't know if you've seen her recently. The point is, she's about as haggard as a. Did not age well. That's what we're getting at here. But she was really pretty in the 80s. But ironically, considering her character in this movie, she just became a victim to old age and a lot of plastic surgery and look horrible. But Meryl Streep, despite being an old, hag, I guess, nowadays, still, for an old hag, it looks relatively attractive.
Watch.
But this was Meryl Streep in her prime, and yeah, I gotta say, totally would bone that.
Yeah, it was weird. I was like,
she was very attractive. Yeah.
I think I would totally hit that.
Oh yeah.
And also, she kind of goes into that kind of more goofy comedy, which is weird.
You know what she reminded me of in this? Since we're going with people reminding us of other people, Catherine O'Hara. I thought she.
You know what? I was seeing this flick, and I was like, if someone like Tim Burton had done it, I think first of all, it would have been a little better.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, someone like that would have fit really well.
Yeah.
In the film,
she really played like the shrill, yet kind of affable harpy, for lack of better words. But yeah, man, she was my favorite of the two. But that's not to say anything against Goldie Hawn, who plays her role magnificently, and they play off each other incredibly well.
Yeah,
everybody works wonderfully in this. Another worthy mention would be Fabio, because he's like totally the star in this. Another worthy mention would be Isabella Rossellini in one of her earlier roles.
I hit that.
Yeah, man. She's mostly renowned for her international. Yeah, probably wouldn't now, but
all right.
If you haven't heard of Isabella Rossellini, it's probably because you weren't watching artsy flicks and or weird throwaway movies. But if you have, she used to be really fucking hot. And it's not to say she's hideous now. She's definitely not leather sack like a fucking Goldie Hawn. But, she hasn't aged magnificently. But most importantly, she directed that one movie with that one scene. Let's cut away to that right now.
I don't think we should talk about it. Unless you're prepared to kill them.
Oh man! Oh God! Oh man! Oh God! Oh man! Oh God! Oh man! Oh God! Oh man!
Anyway, she did that fucking turd. But anyway,
She just looks like an old version of herself. It's
yeah,
kinda weird.
yeah. We are on,
Yeah.
compared to Goldie Hawn, which is just like a. I'm stressing.
I don't want to look it
the
up.
leather
but
sack here.
I'm gonna be disgusted.
It's not good. You know those fucking Land of the Lost creatures? What were they called?
Oh, the slee stacks.
Yeah, imagine that only in the flesh. That's what she looks like now.
Slee stack.
So Goldie Hawn is a slee stack, and that's the point.
Oh wow.
But yeah,
You're right.
the actors in this are phenomenal. They all play up the quirky nature of the whole affair quite well. They're chomping scenery, but it's very fitting. Trust me, that's a good picture.
Shit.
I'll show you one later that's gonna, destroy your ball hair and make your sack look like Goldie Hawn.
Oh god.
Anyway, let's move on to the effects in this. As we've said, this was kind of like a little groundbreaking picture. But I think what I love most about this is that it still depends heavily on the physical aspect of things while using CGI,
When it
in
has to
choice
be done,
moments. Yeah. So that's the way I think CGI should be used. I realize now it's a
yeah.
matter of
Everything's CGI.
expediency and
Like,
a matter of money.
Me
but
doing this is CGI nowadays. For some
yeah,
reason.
this is really an example of what we could achieve. So imagine doing that only nowadays. We could achieve a lot and make things look really cool, really distinct. But yeah,
More
man,
real.
yeah, and the effects are wonderful in this, and we get a very old school feel from them too, which is typical of a lot of Robert Zemeckis' movies. Well, especially back then. Definitely not Polar Express era,
Shit.
but there was kind of like an old school charm to them, especially when we get composite shots, and then the green screen. There's a charm to them that really stands out. But I absolutely love the effects in this. I think they hold up incredibly well. And yeah, man, some of the gags in this are awesome, man. I especially love when Bruce Willis pushes Meryl Streep down the stairs,
Oh yeah.
and he's calling frantically for Goldie Hawn to reveal what he's done. And the shot, first of all, the way the shot is framed is awesome.
It's also a really smart way to cover up some of the effects,
to cover up some of the things that might not work that well. Basically in the background we see a blurred shot of her twisted and contorted body, kind of try to fit itself back into a position where it can work, and then amble towards him. It looked really cool, and you could imagine working if the movie was more of a horror film. You can imagine that working just as well in a creepy fashion, but it works amazingly in a comedic fashion. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie and remains so. But yeah, man, what'd you think about the effects?
I agree. They aged pretty well. Actually, I didn't know this movie was made in '92. It seems like a movie that was made later because of how good the effects look. Pretty sad that we have effects that look shittier nowadays.
Yep.
But there you go.
Yeah. Any effect that particularly stood out besides the one I just mentioned?
I like pretty much anything where they're like peeling and shit. I think that was funny.
Yeah.
Towards the end, the little fight they have with Goldie Hawn. I like how she's just Goldie Hawn, by the way.
Oldie
Hawn.
proper way to say
Goldie
it.
Hawn with the hole.
Yeah.
And they're having a little battle and shit. That was
Yeah,
cool.
I love that they showed that in shadow for a long while.
Yeah.
That was pretty neat. And interesting side note to that, Goldie Hawn got a shovel to the face during that,
All right.
and that contributed to her sack-like appearance. But anyway, really sticking with that. But yeah, there's not much action in this movie, of course, with but it goes hand in hand with the effects, and as we said, those are pretty great. The score in this stands out. It's brought to us by Alan Silvestri, who you can't let go of the fact that he did the score for what?
Avengers. Shit.
Avengers.
Most boring thing ever.
Let's not forget that the man's done many a great score. Let's just hang up on that one.
He's done like 10 trillion great scores, and yet
But
Avengers.
yeah, I absolutely love this score, man. Very reminiscent of something that you'd hear like in a Hitchcock movie. Lots of strings, and it really kind of vamps up the whole nature of the affair. It gives it that I don't know. It gives it both an edge, and it kind of accentuates the humor at the same time. Because it's so contradictory to the serious nature of it. It's so contradictory to how silly the things are that are going on the screen. But anyway, did you enjoy the score in this?
Yeah, there is some more like bouncy themes, but it never goes into the realm of like
Bizarre.
Beetlejuice, where it's like, but it fits perfectly with that movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like I like that little main theme at the end. That's pretty rad.
Mm-hmm.
There's some pretty good little scores. Pretty good. No Avengers for sure.
Damn it. The visual and aesthetic look of this movie is, again, like I said, a very old school approach to it. You know, you get that bridge between kind of like the 50s, 60s era cinema and an effects movie of the 80s and 90s. So it's a definitely a distinct combination of looks. It makes it stand out. Like I said, if you can imagine a Frank Oz movie, this is probably the look that approximates this, and which really dug, man. I really enjoyed the overall look of it. I even kind of enjoyed that we didn't see this in HD because apparently they've not remastered this.
Yeah.
So it was all fuzzy and grainy, which was awesome because it just made me all the more nostalgic for it. So that was pretty neat. But anyway, let's give our final thoughts on this and the score and decide whether this should be a classic or not. Give me your thoughts.
I do find it a little odd. I was going to say this earlier, but might as well throw it in here.
Mm-hmm.
I do find it... I was a little confused because I haven't seen this movie before. That it does take a while for the kind of like kooky stuff to start. And then once that starts, you don't really know who the protagonist is.
Yeah.
Like who you're supposed to like. I'll say throughout the entire movie. Which I could see some people being turned off by. Being like, oh, this is like a bunch of unlikable people. But it actually does kind of lead to something, and you end up liking a certain character, Bruce Willis.
Yeah.
But pretty damn good. And it comes naturally. Whereas if they had just pushed him as the good guy from the beginning, it would have been a little weird.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There is a theme to the movie, but it's a movie before it's about a theme.
Yeah.
And it lets you enjoy what's on screen first before getting you to that theme. But ultimately, the movie is about the trappings of vanity, and it plays it with that very dark humor so that it doesn't come off as overbearing or kind of like a fuddy-duddy moment.
Yeah.
It really just comes off as a moment where you appreciate not only that you've experienced a fun movie, but, oh yeah, you know what? That's true. We should probably not worry about the superficial and just live our lives to the fullest, which is ultimately the message it goes for. And but yeah, like you said, it's actually ultimately it's good. It might have thrown off some people, but I
was a little like, I'm not gonna say I didn't like it, but I was a little confused of what it was trying to do for a while. And I think it does it intentionally because it kind of pushes Goldie Hawn as the potential heroine, but then it kind of flips it and you're like, oh, this is weird. And it doesn't stop doing that until like maybe like the third act maybe. But I ended up liking that. I can see some people being confused, but
yeah, and you know what, it really is that out of our movies we expect a happy ending, or out of our movies we expect a certain structure, and this one throws that to the wind, and actually plays with it very intentionally. I think, like you, it plays with that commonplace structure and makes you doubt and makes your allegiances swing from one side to the other, and ultimately makes you side with a character you least expected to side with, and in a good note, in a good way.
Not only that, but like I said, the kind of like more supernatural elements take a while to start. Which in like kind of something like this, you expect like Beetlejuice is like right away. It starts a little bit of an intro, or like Anatomy, it's like right away you're into the supernatural shit. So it kind of takes a while, which again I kind of liked because you're kind of like, wait, is they like gonna go into the supernatural realm here? And then they do, and you're like, oh okay, they are cool, but it takes its time to get there.
Yeah.
Which I could see someone being like, this stinks, but I liked it.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that. So anyway, final score. And do you think this should be an old classic there?
Score, I do think it could be a little bit better. I do think they could have done a little bit more with some of the humor, but as is, it's pretty damn great. So I'll give it a pretty solid 8. Pretty damn cool, and it should be a classic.
Yeah, I'm with you on this, man. I think I've always thought this should be a classic, and I was very pleased to find out that it's all the more enjoyable. First of all, now from this point of view, and I think whenever you see it again, I think you will find it
Yeah,
all the more.
I'll
Because
say-
I will tell you this: the first time I ever watched it, because I remember I told you that I wanted to see it theatrically, but of course I couldn't. The first time I watched it, I was a little like, oh man, when's this gonna kick in?
Yeah,
When's this-
yeah.
But-
There is a sense of that.
But then it charmed me so much that obviously I ended up watching it a million times. That subsequently it actually feels a lot faster
Yeah,
when
so
you
that-
watch it again.
That is something I do have to say that's with me not knowing where the
Yeah.
movie was going, and me wondering when something's gonna start and all that shit.
In fact, we recently watched a movie that I think had that same effect. Won't reveal what it is, so that'll mean nothing to you. But the point is, yeah, man, I get you, but I definitely think upon
Yeah,
second
I think
viewing,
so
you'll
too.
be like, this is a lot better than I originally thought.
As is, I
considering-
really liked it, but I do think that it will benefit from a second view.
Yeah. But anyway, my final rating will be a solid 9. I do think this should be a classic. I always thought this should be a classic. It really surprised me upon research how, critically divided it was, actually. So that's why it's in this fucking series. But anyway, this has been Ahab. That's Goontick. Check this movie out if you haven't already. And if you have, give it another visit because you might actually enjoy it a whole lot more than you originally thought. Hit like, share, subscribe, those notification buttons. Tell us what you think about this little ditty. Because we're out.
This music's stupid sounds, all kinds of shit for you. Anything goes inside the night, a couple of corpulent Jews. Movies, music, stupid sounds, all kinds of shit for you. Anything goes inside the night.